sweet, sweet elven mead gives me all the power. Sweet, sweet dwarven rings.
I've made a decision. I think I'm going to rewatch all 3 episodes of The Rings of Power Season 2. Before episode 4 comes out. And I'm going to take detailed notes because the first time I watched them, it was just so painful. I had to sort of tweet about it through much of it. And there were just times where I was so aghast at what I was watching that I missed some things. And I want to take, I think, detailed notes and make a really in-depth video and post about all the ways this season is just so ridiculous. I mean, there's the Sauron killing at the beginning, and just so many little details even about that one thing, like him calling himself Sauron. That was not the name that Sauron referred to himself as. That was a derogatory name that the elves gave him. He never called himself that. He was, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but Meron or Tar-Meron. And he called himself all sorts of things, like the Lord of the Earth or whatever. Lots of like high and mighty titles. But he didn't call himself Sauron. This scene at the beginning where he is, a different form, and he's got the long blonde hair, and he's giving a speech to like 40 orcs, and then somehow Adar stabs him with the crown, and then the orcs stab him to death and kill him, and he's like reduced to a venomous blob. This is what it's just. This is one scene, one of many scenes that just shows how fundamentally wrong the creators of Rings of Power get this show. Right? Sauron was a super powerful being. He had been around from the First Age. He was, he worked closely with Morgoth to do all sorts of nefarious things, right? At this point, whenever this takes place, I'm assuming in the Second Age, although the Second Age is so horribly warped by this show and condensed by this show that the timeline and everything is just completely verschnicket. But at this point in time, he would be a very, very powerful being, and he is not going to get Ides of Marched by a pack of orcs and some dark elf guy. It's just not going to happen. These orcs would not be jeering at him. He would not be like trying to rally, badly I might add, this tiny group of orcs. He is an otherworldly being. He is a extraordinarily even without the One Ring, he was still already extraordinarily powerful. And after Morgoth was dead, he would be the most powerful of the bad guys. And they get this wrong with so many little things, like Galadriel's one we've been talking about since season 1, how she is depicted. And I've been, I go and I just read fan reactions, and I was reading this one Reddit thread where someone's kind of like asking, like, can you explain like the difference between Galadriel and then like the lore? I've been trying to fill in the blanks using the show to understand, and it's like, this is one thing that bothers me so much about all the cheerleading for this show, is just that people think that they're getting a window into the Second Age and into understanding these characters better and in understanding this world better and this story better. But the fact of the matter is that none of it is accurate. And Galadriel is probably the worst of all of it, because Galadriel at this point would, she says at one point that Elrond would have gone to the wisest and eldest elf. She makes this crazy assumption that he's gone to Círdan and the shipwright, right? Who is the oldest elf in Middle-earth. But she's the second oldest elf in Middle-earth at this point. And they portray her as a petulant child, as like a college student elf who's, just hot off the protests on her Eregion campus or something, protesting the atrocities that the elves and dwarves are perpetrating against the Palestinian orcs. People are like, oh, people are just, fans are just so sexist and toxic. But really, what a lot of fans wanted was a Galadriel who was, at this point, she would have been very wise. She would already have been a leader of her people, not a commander of armies, but an actual leader of a great region in Middle-earth. And she's much older than Gil-galad, who is often, presented as quite a bit older than her. She's older than Celebrimbor, who's like an old dude in this. Celebrimbor is another character who just is treated so poorly here. And I honestly, I think that the actor who plays Halbrand and the actor who plays Celebrimbor, they're doing a good job, but they are presented, especially Celebrimbor is presented as such a fool, and they've rushed that whole thing. Like, there could have been a whole season of Anatar infiltrating the elves and like winning them over and winning over Celebrimbor and really playing into his ego issues and whatnot. Numenor, that's another storyline. Obviously, since everything's condensed so much, we're getting all these things playing out at once. But the Forging of the Rings took place long before the fall of Numenor. And in Numenor, that whole storyline is just so weird and rushed. Like the Palantir, the like sort of nativism that the Numenors have, and the hatred of elves is so strange in such a weird way. I've seen fans of this show talking about how it's like, oh, it's such great scheming and politicking, and it really isn't, though. Like, it really isn't. None of it makes sense. It's very rushed. That eagle showing up out of nowhere is super rushed. And another thing that I've noticed is I get a lot of hate for my opinions on this show. And people always say things like, you clearly have never read the source material. And it's like, okay, two things. I have. A lot of it, I am not nearly as extensively read on all the different Tolkien texts outside of the main trilogy, The Hobbit and the Silmarillion. Like, there's a lot of, I haven't read the Silmarillion in so long. But even if you set aside the lore and all the ways that they get this wrong, it's still such a goofy show. Not only boring and tedious, but the dialogue is constantly so overwrought. It's this constant attempt to sound like Tolkien without any of the artistry and skill at prose that Tolkien had. Tolkien is the orcish version of Tolkien. And so so you get all these just weird, clumsy things like Elrond running away with the rings, and he jumps off the waterfall into the ocean. Then he goes to Círdan, who he gives the rings to, and Círdan goes and takes them out like a little ways into the ocean and throws them in the ocean. Like, how did they write that? How did they write that this was how they were going to dispose of these rings, when Elrond could have simply already just left them in the ocean when he jumped in the first place? Although the ocean does spit the rings back out for Círdan.
The sea is always right!
The sea is always right!
The point I'm trying to make here is not to go back over and review these first 3 episodes again. No, I'm going to do that. I need to do that with a fine-tooth comb. I really think there's just so much nitty-gritty to pluck out of there. But if I can do it, if I can torture myself that much. My point is that I think one of the reasons that fans of the books and of Tolkien's Legendarium get so upset by this is the fact that most people aren't going to read that stuff. Most people haven't even read the original trilogy. They've just watched the movies. And so they're watching this and they're thinking, oh, this is actually what happened, or a version of what happened. But it's almost never actually a version of what happened. It's so distorted that it's not just not lore accurate, it's not timeline accurate, it's not character accurate. I still don't know why they couldn't have just made a story in the Second Age that had all new characters rather than dealing like having Galadriel or Elrond. We didn't need those characters. You could have told an original story within the Second Age where those events were referenced. I mean, there could have just been a story about the fall of Numenor. There was a lot of things they could have done differently, and instead they tried to have it all. And in having it all, have made it nothing. And in trying to appeal to all these different audiences, because this is like a dark and gritty show for families, right? You make a show that also is for nobody. And it kind of makes me sad, because there is such a wealth of story. And I had one person on Twitter say, well, why is it okay that people are, they remake Dracula stories, or they remake Sherlock Holmes stories and all that? Well, a couple reasons. Like, they're saying, why is it okay for that but not for Tolkien? Well, there are two main reasons why it's different. First of all, the works of Arthur Conan Doyle, the legends of vampires and Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula and all that, they are very far in the past and have reached a level of being almost like folklore now. And with folklore and with these old stories, we do make lots of different versions. And it's like Shakespeare too, right? We have lots of different versions of Hamlet and Macbeth. And, you can go to a play where Macbeth is set in, the 1920s and it's a mobster movie. And we all accept that because that's just kind of how it's always been. People reinterpret plays and timelines and, you've got like the all lesbian version of Hamlet and that's cool, whatever. You do your thing with Shakespeare. Do your thing. Make your modern Sherlock Holmes show with Benjamin Cumberbunch, and make your all your different versions of Dracula and Dracula fighting ninjas. That doesn't bother us because these are old stories that have been retold so many times, and maybe there will come a day long in the future where all this stuff, this Lord of the Rings stuff is so old and distant that we've had like the version of Lord of the Rings that takes place in modern day cyberpunk New York or whatever. I don't know. The second thing, though, and I think this is even more important, is that Tolkien created a vast, rich universe for his stories. He created more than one language. He created the script, the Elvish script. He created, thousands of years of history, and he meticulously and in a detailed fashion like mapped out his world. And so when you go to tell a story in that world, you're there, you want to shoot for fidelity to what he envisioned, because he did do a lot of legwork already. And it's almost like you don't want to change what he did, because it's not like Sherlock Holmes it's not like Arthur Conan Doyle created the Sherlock Holmes universe with he just put him in the real world. So it's different. It's fundamentally different when you have this kind of source material. Now, I would be okay if people were being a little creative with it. For instance, when I was younger, I made my own Lord of the Rings role-playing game with a little twist on the premise. And it was sort of, what if Frodo had killed Gollum, and he got to Mount Doom with the ring on, and couldn't throw it in, and instead Sauron was able to retrieve the ring and turn the tide of war in his favor. The idea being that you are now adventurers in this dystopian alternate version of the Lord of the Rings, right? And this I kind of liked this idea because it kind of made it a cool tabletop RPG to play in, that was different than just the Lord of the Rings, right? But so like if you're gonna, I can kind of respect like, oh, you have a creative new take on this. But if you're going to go back and you're going to say, we're telling the story of the Second Age, we're telling this story, this prequel story to Lord of the Rings, we're going to talk about how the rings were forged and how Numenor fell. Making it up as you go along is foolish and bizarre because you already have these stories. Now, I know they only had the rights to whatever, to the appendices. They didn't have everything. Okay. That doesn't mean that you can just go and radically change what is there, and in ways that simply don't work. Again, I would say that lore changes and being unfaithful to source material can work if you do it well. And if Rings of Power was this really compelling show with great characters and lots of tension and engaging dialogue and all the rest, then fine. But it isn't. It's a show where they utter lines like the sea is always right and give me the meat and give it to me raw, which is actually one of the better lines on the show, and it's still laugh out loud bad. It's a show that deals with constant mystery boxes like, who's that wizard? Is it Gandalf or isn't it Gandalf? And they've introduced another wizard. Who's that wizard? And they try, it's just obnoxious storytelling. It really is. And it drives me crazy. So I am going to go rewatch the first 3 episodes and write more detailed notes this time instead of sort of like just laughing my ass off the whole time. And then obviously I'll do a review of episode 4. It was a lot to watch all 3 also. I think I was just absolutely zonked out by the end of it because watching 3 long-ass, boring-ass Rings of Power episodes in one evening whilst fast traveling around the country that was torture for sure. So I don't know. What were some of the moments that stuck out to you in season 2? Like, there's the Venom floppy monster version of Sauron and how he was originally killed. There's the whole bizarre him turning himself in and effectively being captured by Adar. I was told by one commenter that I was lying because I said he was captured when he really turned himself in. He turned himself in and was then promptly imprisoned. Sorry to not be more specific, angry commenter. And then there's just the whole conflict over the three rings, which were never corrupted by Sauron. It's so silly, this whole approach to this. I mentioned that there was only ever one Durin, and people are like, there were 7 Durins. It's like, yeah, no, I didn't mean that there was only one Durin ever. There's 7 reincarnations of Durin. They're never 2 at once. It wasn't like a Durin father and a Durin son like they do in this show. There's the orc families, which honestly I believe, because Tolkien said it, that orcs did reproduce. There were female orcs, but they were never in war. And orcs are a violent and warlike race. They are not trying to stay out of the fights to, save their families. That's just not how orcs are. Don't try to change orcs. Again, it's just bizarre. If you are going to try to change the nature of orcs, I do think Adar as a character is kind of interesting, though he was much better in season 1, which is weird how many things were actually better in season 1. Numenor, that whole plot line is just garbage. Maybe the goofiest part of the whole 3 episodes, though, was Arondir, telling us how Bronwyn died because the orc arrow, after she was totally cured and all pretty and clean and good, the orc arrow still got her. Couldn't they have thought of something better? Did they have to even kill her off? Couldn't they have her couldn't they have just paid her enough money to kill her off on screen? I guarantee you that they could have dropped a little bit of money for that actress to film one scene to have her die in this season. All right, that's enough for now. The next episode comes out Thursday. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Peace.
Sweet elven meat gives me all the power. Sweet dwarven rings gives me